Paul, we're thankful to have you here today. Please go ahead and teach us on ITIL today.
Wow, that's high praise for introduction. Thank you, Luke. Let's talk about ITIL, folks. ITIL stands for the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. It's essentially a set of books that help you manage your IT department. ITIL has led the service management industry with guidance and training and certification programs for a really, really long time. ITIL 4 is an update to ITIL that enhances and adds value because of understanding new technologies like Agile and like Lean and Kaizen and Kanban and Shift Left and all sorts of new practices that didn't exist or weren't popular back in the earlier days of ITIL. So ITIL 4 is really embracing these new ways of working. When we look at the evolution of ITIL, it's been going on for quite some time now. Back in the 1980s, the first books were produced in '89, ITIL version 1. Everything was a function back then, meaning a specialist. And in the early 2000s, service delivery and service support were brought up. These being the tactical, service delivery being tactical, and service support being the operational aspects of how we managed our IT department. In 2007, the service lifecycle was brought in. Now, in 2000, in the early version of version 2 of ITIL, security was just kind of an afterthought. I've got the book just across the library from me here, sitting on the shelf. It's 86 pages long, the entire security book. There wasn't much to it back then. In 2007, ITIL folded in all of these things, baked in security, as opposed to putting a Band-Aid on it and slapping it on in 2000. So this is the service life cycle that's been quite popular for many years. As a matter of fact, I'm teaching another course right now, but this is that service life cycle where we had strategy, design, transition, operations, and continuous service improvement, which worked really well for waterfall projects, but maybe not so much for agile projects. So this is what we talked about in 2007. 2011, they added in business alignment by adding in design coordination and business relationship management as a process. In 2016, they came up with 9 guiding principles, 7 of which have survived, which we're going to talk about today. And the new construct that replaced the life cycle is called the service value system, which is the subject of most ITIL 4 courses that are available today. Not only does the service value system support waterfall projects, but it also supports agile projects. So there's a construct now that's completely different that supports both kinds of projects. This is the service value system. So it has a number of different elements to it. Of course, everything we do starts with opportunity and ends with value. And if we're trying to repair something, it might start with the demand of, oh, my monitor's broken, or whatever else you may have. So if we look at the idea of the guiding principles, we're going to talk about these 7 guiding principles today. We also have other elements in here. We have the idea of governance. IT governance, where we set up policies for an organization. We look at working inside of policies. We all love them or hate them. We all have our policies to work with. Then we look at the idea of the service value chain. In an effort to support lean and value streams and mapping out how we do the work that we do, ITIL identifies these 6 value chain activities with specific inputs and outputs and practices, which used to be called processes, that will support those kinds of activities. Again, practices, there are now 34 practices. For those of you that are considering the ITIL Foundations exam, there's only 18 on that exam, but the practices are sets of organizational resources that are specialized to perform some work. Practices now contain processes. In addition to that, we have continual improvement with the model that we've seen for years in ITIL, the continual improvement model, the CSI model, as it's called. But for this next few minutes, we're going to focus on this stuff up here, talking about the guiding principles. A lot of my students ask me questions about the guiding principles. Well, guiding principles are core guidance from ITIL. The recommendations that can guide an organization in all circumstances, regardless of changes in the organizational goals or strategies or kind of work or your management structure. As a result of high velocity IT, as a result of digital transformation, as a result of many other pressures, market pressures, organizational structures are changing. Maybe not so hierarchical, maybe not so bureaucratic. So when we look at, the idea of guiding principles, even though we're changing our organizational structure, among other things, we can still get some benefit from these guiding principles. Also reflected in many other frameworks and methods and standards and philosophies. We talk about the guiding principles and our bodies of knowledge like Lean and Agile and DevOps and COBIT. Again, the control objectives for IT covers the same ground as ITIL, only it does so from an auditory stance. Have you done this yet? Where ITIL says you ought to consider doing this, DevOps says, have you done that yet? So the guiding principles allow organizations to effectively integrate the use of multiple methods in an overall approach. Really, we're talking about customizing ITIL for that particular organization. As ITIL is a framework, not a standard, it doesn't say to us, and you shall. It says you ought to consider doing this. So these are our 7 guiding principles. And just to break them down for you a little bit of detail on them, when we talk about focus on value, ITIL tells us that everything we do should link to value defined by the consumer's needs, and also that value changes over time and in different circumstances. If you've got that brand new cell phone, you probably appreciate that cell phone a lot more than your old beater. Value changes over time and in different circumstances. ITIL tells us to start when we are. When we start a new project, don't just chuck out everything and start over fresh. Assess where you are. Use your measurement framework to rationally consider what parts you can keep. Don't use start over as a default stance. You may have to, but use that as a last ditch effort. And we look at progressing iteratively with feedback. So try not to do everything all at once. Back in the day, we used waterfall projects, and the element of change we had in a project was massive, high risk, high cost change. We only had one chance to get it right. ITIL 4 is now supporting the idea of Agile, saying, look, break it into smaller chunks. Start small, building into larger improvements. When we look at the principle for collaborating and promote visibility, make sure you involve all the right stakeholders. Realize that as a principle, inclusion is better than exclusion. And also supporting visibility. If you're in an environment where you're making changes and you're not notifying anybody about those changes, the rumor mill starts to work and people start to talk about what the change might be, even though they have no information. So making sure that we have that visibility reduces the effect of that rumor mill. Thinking and working holistically, even though you're in the trenches working in these small little bits, realize that the whole thing still needs to fit together. All the parts need to work together. After you disassemble it, you got to put it back together. You got to make it work again. Nothing stands alone. We have this end-to-end visibility. And keep it simple and practical. Well, we all know that rule. We don't really say practical though, do we? So, we say it a little bit differently. We want to minimize the number of steps, and we would talk about outcome-based thinking, and we want to eliminate things of no value. So we scrutinize how we did things. And if we come up with a step that says, you know what, we're doing this just for the sake of bureaucracy, this is where we get a chance to get rid of that step. We only make things more complex if it's really justified to do so. And before we automate something, we always optimize it. We don't take our unoptimized, possibly erroneous practices and automate those. So these are the 7 guiding principles. They're boiled down from what used to be in the practitioner material in ITIL 2011. Collaborating and promoting visibility used to be 2 separate principles, and there was another one as well, I forget which one, but we ended up with 9 principles. They've been boiled down to 7 principles. And what I want to do with this seminar is I wanted to create a situation where we could make a practical application of those principles, because they're really nice to look at on the page, but how do they help me? What do they help me do? So in this case, the sample application is about improving user capabilities. Service relationships are about value co-creation for all stakeholders. In other words, your IT department helps you out, and you directly or indirectly fund your IT department. So there's value co-creation, there's value going both ways. Each service interaction is an opportunity to elevate the capabilities of another party. So for instance, each guiding principle from ITIL can be used for one group to improve the capabilities of another group. In this instance, I want to talk about here, service providers, IT departments in other words, and customers can use the ITIL guiding principles to improve user capabilities. So how do we apply these 7 guiding principles to improving user capabilities? Well, here's how we do it. When we start looking at focusing on value, users should understand the purpose and the context of their work. Why am I doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it? They should be encouraged to offer service improvements that may contribute to value co-creation. Even if it's not a great idea. Windows wasn't Bill Gates' first idea, but boy, it was a pretty good one when it came by. So we want to encourage those ideas. When we start where you are, well, the improvement of user experience should be based on the current practices and habits and expectations. Radical changes in user experiences are rarely perceived as changes for the better and are often resisted by users. Folks, when encountering radical change or drastic change, they tend to grieve the change. They deny it. They blame self, blame others. They go back to the point of getting to an even keel, but it takes some time, and all that time, productivity is lost. So small incremental changes are a little bit better when we talk about user experience. If we look at progressing iteratively with feedback, so all changes and requirements to users, service delivery, assessment, service usage procedures, and other aspects of user experience should be tested and continually reviewed based on user feedback. And that feedback, users should be encouraged to provide that feedback, and follow-up actions should be as transparent as possible to the user community. When we look at collaborate and promote visibility, where joint operations are required, users should understand the need for collaboration. We need to work with them because, and they should be able to help each other as well as service providers, partners, and suppliers, and other parties involved. When services don't do what they're supposed to be doing, or when a user does not know how to use it, calling for help or reporting an incident should be safe, should be easy, and it should be encouraged. We talk about think and work holistically. Services and their role in the value co-creation should be visible, and they should be transparent to all involved parties. So users should understand the context of their work and their dependencies. So they should see how they fit into the larger picture, as it were. If we look at our sixth principle, keep it simple and practical. Well, user interfaces and all other touch points should be as simple as possible. I get it. These are tension metrics. You can have it good or you can have it fast. You can have it simple or you can have it cheap. You don't always get to have both of those. It's quite a challenge to get that balance in organizations. So this is what we're focusing on, making things as simple as possible. Users should have an opportunity to propose improvements to the interface, and these proposals should be treated seriously, and they should be transparently. Nothing hidden is what we're talking about. So when we look at the idea of user capabilities, we're concerned with things like customer experience and user experience. So every time the user uses an application, they execute a touch point, and that touch point develops an opinion eventually of that application or that line of business application or that service or whatever it may be. And so as a result, you reach what's called a moment of truth. And that moment of truth is, I think this application is, and you fill in the blank. I don't know what you're going to say, awesome, horrible, whatever it may be, but that's that moment of truth. So we want to be able to understand the user opinion of things, and we want to be able to have the users, propose improvements to the interface, because they're using those tools on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones that we should really be listening to. Finally, we want to optimize and automate. Those things that most people do the same way every time are the best candidates for automation. Those tasks that are infrequently done, that have a lot of variance in what they do, they're maybe not the best candidate for automation. So continual optimization and automation of user experience should be a theme of all of our touch points and those service interactions between users and service providers. So that gives us a look at all 7 of these points over here when we talk about how you apply them in this particular example, just to the idea of improving user capabilities. There's lots of other applications of the 7 guiding principles, but this seminar was about giving you that one look at it. So the guiding principles embody the core messages of ITIL, of service management in general, of supporting successful actions and good decisions at all types and all levels of organizations. They can be used to guide organizations in their work as they adopt service management approach and adapt ITIL guidance to their own specific needs and circumstances. So these guiding principles encourage and support organizations in the continual improvement at all levels. So we've got some question time. I'll pass that back to Luke, who will then handle your questions for you.
Paul, thank you so much for that load of information you just gave to us. Very helpful. At this point, as Paul mentioned, we do want to take your questions that you have for Paul. We've got him for a little over 10 minutes now before he goes back to instructing today. So please either type that question in the chat if you're more, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A if you're more comfortable with that, or if you want to raise your hand with that function, I could go ahead and unmute you and you could ask the question that way. So what questions, who would like to go first with the question regarding ITIL? We have somebody breaking the ice here. Question, Paul, in the chat is, what's the possible link with Scrum methods or other Agile? What's the possible link?
Okay, so if we look at Scrum and we look at Agile together and Agile in general, but Scrum specifically, Scrum works on the basis of backlog for new features and epics and so on and so forth. And prior to that, in ITIL, we used formal change management. But as you know, Scrum has its own method of evaluating user stories and other things that we placed into that backlog, and its own method of prioritization. Agile now embraces that. So we're certainly embracing Scrum methods, embracing the idea of sprints. Again, going back to the presentation, we talked about the idea of progressing iteratively with feedback. So we're looking at, the notion of small sprints of change as opposed to that large, massive chunk of change. So Agile does certainly work with Scrum methods or other Agile methods as well.
Perfect, thank you. Looks like Young has a question, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute Young. And you can go ahead and ask Paul that question, Young. You should be unmuted now. So
gonna have to reach the lower left of his screen and open up that microphone icon.
You're unmuted now, Paul, or Young, but go ahead and take a look at the bottom. And if you see a red line through the mute, unmute microphone icon, go ahead and click that. Or maybe you raised your hand accidentally, which is fine too. Because it looks like you're still muted.
Maybe just get them to type into the text screen might be a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, feel free to type that in, Young. Anyone else have a question they would like to ask Paul? Please go ahead and type that in the chat. All right. Did I say chat again? Let's make that the Q&A. Give another minute or two here.
That's awesome. I might get lunch today after all. Look at that, Luke.
You know what?
Woo!
Here
we go.
Good evening. Insightful presentation. Questions I have. He has a background in software, or he or she, in software development, business analysis, and information security, not so much in ITIL. So how important is ITIL in companies operating in software development and business analysis?
Oh, as a matter of fact, what I'm teaching this week is business analysis. The only part of what you do that I don't do is the actual software development chunk. So looking at the ITIL part, the security part, the software development part, and the BA part, it's really critical they all work together. And in fact, if you look at ITIL 4 practices, which I mentioned earlier, software development and business analysis are both considered ITIL practices now because that's how important they are. The Project Management Institute tells us, in North America tells us that of the projects that fail, 37% of those projects that fail due to missed requirements. That underscores the need of business analysis, where we capture and communicate and document and design those requirements. So that's critical, right? And when we talk about ITIL, it supports that notion. So when you look at how these all three fit together, I teach these three different disciplines when we talk about ITIL, DevOps, and business analysis, because there's a lot of commonality between them. They're all interdependent. So I would have to answer your question by saying a very, very important. And by the way, good evening. Where are you calling in from? That'd be interesting to find out where that is.
Yeah, please let us know, and thank you for that answer, Paul. Another question here in the chat says, do I have to take ITIL 3 certification before ITIL 4?
No, you don't. However, ITIL 3 certification may still be useful to you in certain circumstances. Now, I shouldn't say it that way. I should say it's always useful to you. But if you've taken some ITIL version 3 courses, there is a, if you go to the Axelos website, axelos.com, they have a transition path document that'll show you, I think it's called the transition journey document. It'll show you how, if you are in ITIL version 3 and you want to get to ITIL 4, there's different paths to get there. Yes, you could start over with ITIL Foundations 4, or you could do, well, like the course I'm teaching tomorrow is the ITIL 4 Bridge course. And that is a kind of a 6 hours back end work for students to do on their own, then 1 day in class, and then they can take the exam from there. But the exam is the same. Whether you take the Bridge course or the 3-day ITIL Foundations course, it's the same exam. Prior versions of ITIL, ITIL 3 had a half-size exam when you went from ITIL version 2 to ITIL version 3. When you're going from 3 to 4, it's a full-size exam. So if you're starting brand new, join the masses, join the throngs that are coming to our ITIL 4 classes, because we pretty much need zip codes for the classes now. They're getting really, really big. ITIL 4 is catching on quite well.
Indeed, indeed it is. Thanks, Paul. One anonymous attendee thanks you for the review and asks, what is the best way to begin internal conversation on suggestions to make improvements to an application frequently used by your line of business?
So one of the quick ways that you might get some information, and again, based on what you've told me, I'm just going to give you a couple of off the top of my head thoughts. The first one might be a survey, an artfully done survey can get information from, especially from pain points. Because if you think of how you have filled in surveys over the last couple of years, as a society, my opinion is that we're pretty much surveyed out. I'd only fill in surveys myself, and this is a confession personally here, when I really feel strongly about something, good or bad. So if you use a survey for starting your application improvement, you're certainly going to get the lovers and haters out of the woods really quickly with that. But you won't always get 100% response to your survey. So that's probably the best way to start in terms of looking for improvements. And also make sure that you're sending that survey to the right people. Just make sure you send it to the users of the app, the people that are using, that feeling the pain every single day.
Somewhat related, Paul, to that question, an attendee asks, does the application of ITIL values require knowledge of ITIL guidelines by the whole org, the whole team, or can it be implemented by management only and maybe a handful of personnel?
Here's what I see. I see that we have a lot of folks that are going through the 3-day Foundations course, understanding that Foundations is the terminology and the concepts behind ITIL. It's not application level detail. So that's the starting spot. It's intended to be as wide ranging as possible. You don't have to be an IT person to take ITIL Foundations course, although it doesn't hurt if you're an IT person. We speak to, strategic, tactical, and operational concerns in there. But what we see is that as you get more expertise in organizations that might be, encased in a management role, that those management roles may go to the second level, the specialist courses that are supporting create, deliver, support, DPI, HVIT, and all those defined stakeholder value, as well as the strategic courses.
Helpful, helpful. We'll take maybe a couple more here. We're about 3 minutes from the bottom of the hour. For project managers and product managers, Paul, working in an SI and C environment, is the ITIL framework a nice to have or a must have?
You're going to have to educate me on what an SI and C environment is.
If you could type that in the chat with an SI and C, is that system integrator? What is it, SI and C? And then we'll take one other here, Paul. Requirements, in my experience, does not get enough focus to get very specific to ensure the value. Just lost the question here. The value to a given customer. Would you concur?
Depends on what requirement you're talking about. If we trace the whole path, our business needs are the genesis of our project. Those prompt us to get business requirements that are typically exposed in a smart format, like increased customer satisfaction scores by 15% over the next 6 months. So those are what we call SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, repeatable, and time-bounded. Those business requirements then fall down into stakeholder requirements, the interest of those specific parties that are, that are supporting or maybe not supporting your project for that much. And those requirements need to be traced down to solution requirements, which are commonly referred to in two categories as functional and non-functional requirements. Those are the ones, when you get down to that level, those are very specific requirements. The functional requirements are the ones of what we see in the user interface, the pick list, the radio button, all that kind of stuff. And the non-functional requirements are the abilities, availabilities, reliabilities, capacities, all those kinds of things. So hopefully that gives you a better picture. And in that sense, no, I really can't quite agree with you.
Perfect. Quick hit answer here, Paul. Are the exams included in the global knowledge classes?
Yes, and even worse than that, they guarantee you'll pass.
Nice.
Read the
Nice.
website. So they've got this campaign where if you take the course and you don't pass the exam, you can come back and take the course again. And if you don't pass the exam, you can come back and take the course again. And if you go through all 3 tries of the course and the exam, they'll actually refund the money that you paid for the course, short of the actual exam cost that they have to go and buy outright. Now, check with your local part of the world, because we could be talking to anywhere on the planet right now. So check with your localized, course coordinators at Global Knowledge to make sure that that's appropriate for you. But I know that applies in North America.
Yeah, hard to beat that deal. This will probably be the last one here, Paul. Ahil gave us the SINC. It is system integrator and consulting. So he's asking for project or product managers working in a system integrator and consulting environment. Is the ITIL framework a nice to have or a must have in your opinion?
Okay, thank you for augmenting that answer, Ahil. That's a really good question. Here's the situation that I see. If you're working in a consulting environment, if you're a contractor to other organizations, they're the ones that are going to drive you towards ITIL. And what I've seen over my experience of teaching better than 5,000 students ITIL, I started back in 2006 in the summer teaching big banks in Canada. The next summer, I was teaching contractors to big banks in Canada because the bank said, we're not renewing your contract unless you're ITIL. And so the driver behind, does your consulting organization go down the ITIL path, is going to be, do you have a good understanding of how to communicate with your, with your organization, your client organization? And if your client organization is adopting ITIL, they're going to pressure you to go down the ITIL path, which you probably know a good chunk of already by dealing with that client. So yes, it would be critical.
Great. Thank you, Paul. We are down at the bottom of the hour. Thank you so much for attending. Paul, great information. Listen, if you are interested in taking an ITIL class with us, that ITIL 4 Foundation would be the place to start. It's a 3-day class. In fact, for attending today's webinar, we want to offer you 25% off of that course. If you want to take advantage of that and you're here in the US, you would use webinar 25. And that will get you 25% off, or in Canada, CA webinar 25, and we'll get you 25% off of that course to jump into, and more than likely taking that with Paul. So don't hesitate to, even today, reach out, go to the Global Knowledge website. There are a ton of additional resources, free live webinars coming up, just a lot of goods to take advantage of and to help you in your technology job. So once again, Paul, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. We say that to the attendees as well. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks
Nice
all.
talking to you folks. Hopefully we'll see you in class.
Thank you.